The train stopped with a tired scream, like an old mule refusing to go one step farther. Steam rolled into the cold February air as snow swept across the empty platform. Clara pressed her face to the frozen window, her breath fogging the glass as Red Hollow came into view. The town looked smaller than she had imagined. A short line of wooden buildings leaned into the wind, their false fronts trying to look important. Her stomach tightened. This was it, the place where her new life was supposed to begin. She stood and smoothed her traveling dress with shaking hands. At 26, she was already considered past her prime back in Ohio. Too old, too tall, too much of everything men said they did not want. But the letter in her coat pocket had promised something different. Matthew Pierce of the Double Bar Ranch had written plain and direct. He wanted a wife and a working woman. Height and looks did not matter, he said. Clara had read those words until the paper softened in her fingers. The conductor appeared at the door and lifted her valise without asking. He glanced at her, his eyes traveling higher than most men's ever had. He cleared his throat and asked if this was her stop. Clara nodded and told him she was meeting Mr. Matthew Pierce. The conductor hesitated, just a moment, but she saw it. Pity or doubt. Then he helped her down. The platform was nearly empty. A yellow dog nosed through crates. An old man slept on a bench as snow gathered on his hat. There was no Matthew Pierce, no welcoming face. The wind cut through Clara's coat like broken glass. She pulled it tighter and waited. Minutes passed. Then, more. The train pulled away with a lonely whistle, leaving only silence and cold behind. Clara stared down the tracks until they disappeared into white. No one came. She dragged her trunk toward the depot. The door was locked. Inside, a cold stove sat beside an empty chair. The board showed the next train east would not arrive for 3 days. She stood on the main street, tall and still, while life moved around her. Men laughed outside a saloon. A woman hurried past with her head down. A child stared openly at Clara's height before being pulled away. No one offered help. Clara straightened her back. She had spent her life being told to make herself smaller. She would not do that here. At last, she pulled her trunk toward the Silver Dollar Saloon. The piano stopped the moment she entered. Smoke hung thick in the air. Men stared. Women with painted faces smiled. Sharp smiles. Clara asked for Matthew Pierce. Laughter rippled through the room. Someone said he owed money. Clara said again that he was expecting her, that she was his intended from Ohio. Silence fell. A man appeared at the top of the stairs. He was neat and clean, smaller than she expected. He looked at her like she was something tracked in on a boot. He spoke her name flatly and said she failed to mention what she was. Clara told him she had said she was tall. He laughed without warmth and said no man wanted to look up at his wife. He called it unnatural. The word cut deep. Clara asked why he sent for her. He said he expected a woman, not this. Then he turned away. Whispers filled the room. Heat burned her cheeks. Clara gathered what dignity she could and walked out into the snow. It fell harder as she dragged her trunk down the street. Her boots slipped. Her fingers burned with cold. She reached a narrow boarding house. A small woman with sharp eyes opened the door and pulled her inside without asking questions. She gave Clara a bed and spoke gently, telling her she was not foolish, only hopeful. That night, Clara stared out the window at falling snow. She had been rejected and mocked, but she was still standing. She decided she would stay. Tomorrow she would find work. Tomorrow she would prove she belonged. Morning came cold and gray. Clara dressed with care and pinned her hair neat. If Red Hollow was going to look at her, it would see her standing tall. Downstairs, the boarding house owner pushed a cup of coffee into her hands and told her she would need strength. Clara said she needed work. The woman studied her and asked if she was willing to earn it. Clara said she always had been. Word spread fast through Red Hollow. By noon, most folks knew about the tall woman Matthew Pierce had sent for and turned away. Some pitied her. Some laughed. Doors opened and closed as Clara asked for work. No one needed help, or no one wanted trouble. By afternoon, Clara sat on the edge of the bed again, hands tight in her lap. Maybe staying was a mistake. That was when a knock came. A man waited in the parlor. He was taller than Matthew, broader through the shoulders, his clothes worn but clean. He took off his hat and introduced himself as James Pierce. He apologized for his brother. He said the letter had been sent against his advice. He said a wife was not something you ordered. Clara listened in silence. Then he offered her work at his ranch. He said he needed a cook and respected how she had stood straight the day before. By sunset, Clara rode out of Red Hollow in James Pierce's wagon, her trunk tied behind. The Circle P ranch spread wide under a pale sky. The men stared, then nodded. The work was hard, and mistakes came easy. Clara felt clumsy and tired. That evening, she walked toward the trees to breathe. A horse approached from the shadows. Matthew Pierce appeared, his voice sharp with drink. He grabbed her arm. Fear rose fast. Before he could move again, another voice cut through the dark and told him to stop. A tall cowboy stepped forward, calm and steady. Matthew backed away and rode off. The man asked if Clara was all right. He introduced himself as Colt Ramsey. He walked her back to the ranch. As the lights glowed warm and voices filled the night, Clara felt something shift inside her. She was afraid, but she was no longer alone. The weeks that followed tested Clara in ways she never expected. Life at the Circle P ranch settled into a hard and steady rhythm. Mornings came before sunrise, when frost still clung to the ground and the men moved like shadows through the cold. Clara learned their habits slowly. She learned who needed 2 cups of coffee before speaking, who liked extra salt, who ate in silence when the day had gone bad. Her cooking improved, and so did her confidence. Little by little, the men stopped seeing her as the tall stranger and began to see her as someone who belonged. James Pierce treated her with quiet respect. He never hovered and never doubted her strength. He spoke plainly and listened when she spoke back. Clara appreciated that more than she could say. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything pressed down on her chest. At night, when the wind rattled the windows, old words crept back into her thoughts. Unnatural. Too much. Not wanted. It was Colt Ramsey who seemed to notice those moments most. He stopped by the ranch often, sometimes with a reason, sometimes with none at all. He brought news from town or helped mend a fence that did not truly need fixing. Sometimes he just shared a cup of coffee by the fire. With him, Clara did not feel the need to explain herself. He met her eyes easily, like her height was the most natural thing in the world. Word traveled fast in Red Hollow. Folks talked about the tall woman at the Circle P and the cowboy who seemed always near her side. Some smiled when they spoke. Others whispered. Matthew Pierce did not smile at all. One cold afternoon, trouble came again. Clara returned from the barn and found James standing stiffly in the yard. A rider had just left, heading back toward town. James told her it had been Matthew. He was claiming James had stolen his rightful bride. Clara felt anger rise, hot and sharp. She said she had never been Matthew's property. James agreed, but said Matthew was stirring ugly talk, trying to shame her into leaving. That night, Clara stood alone outside the bunkhouse, staring at the wide, dark land. She had already run once. She would not do it again. She promised herself that. The next morning, Colt rode in early. One look at Clara's face told him something was wrong. When she told him, his jaw tightened. He said Matthew would not stop unless someone stopped him. Clara told Colt she did not want him fighting her battles. Colt met her eyes and said he was not standing with her because she was weak, but because she was strong. That evening, Matthew Pierce arrived at the ranch uninvited. He stood in the yard, loud and bitter, accusing Clara of ruining his name. The men gathered, but stayed silent. Before James could speak, Clara stepped forward. Snow crunched under her boots as she faced Matthew. She told him he had ruined his own name. She said he had sent for a wife and treated her like livestock. She said she had stayed, worked, and earned her place. She owed him nothing. Matthew sneered and looked at Colt. He asked if Colt truly wanted a woman who made him look small. Colt answered calmly that he had never felt smaller standing beside Clara, only stronger. The yard stayed quiet. Matthew looked around and found no allies. At last, he turned and left. his pride dragging behind him. The next morning, Clara packed her things. James frowned and told her she did not have to go. Clara said she knew, but it was time she chose her own path. She thanked him for giving her a chance when no one else had. James nodded, understanding more than he said. Clara returned to Red Hollow and reopened Mrs. Dale's parlor as a small sewing room. Word spread quickly. Dresses, repairs, work clothes. Clara's hands were steady and her stitches sure. Women came not just for her skill, but for the quiet strength she carried. Some spoke of husbands and worries they had never said out loud before. Clara listened. Colt visited often. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all. Sometimes they talked until the lamps burned low. With him, Clara felt seen without being measured. Still, she sensed something waiting ahead, something that would ask her to choose again. One evening, as snow fell soft over Red Hollow, Clara locked the shop and stepped into the quiet street. Colt stood waiting. He looked nervous in a way she had not seen before. He said there was something he had been wanting to ask her. Clara smiled and said she had been wanting to ask him something too. He asked where she slept now. Clara told him she rented a cold room upstairs with a narrow bed. Colt nodded once, then met her eyes. He told her she could sleep at his place, not because she needed it, but because he wanted her there. Clara's breath caught as she searched his face. There was no pity there, no need to control, only choice. She felt the weight of every mile she had traveled, every word that had tried to make her smaller, and she felt herself standing tall, exactly as she was meant to. Snow fell softly the night Clara followed Colt to his ranch. The house was simple, built strong against wind and time. A single lamp burned warm inside. When Clara stepped through the door, she did not feel like a guest. She felt like someone who had finally come home. Colt showed her the spare room without hurry or expectation. He told her to rest. His voice was steady, respectful. That alone loosened something tight inside her chest. Life changed quietly after that. Clara kept her sewing room in Red Hollow and split her days between town and the ranch. People noticed. Some talked. Some judged. But more and more, folks began to greet her with nods instead of stares. Women brought their daughters to her shop. Men tipped their hats. Clara stood the same way she always had, tall and unbowed. Colt never rushed her. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. They talked about small things and heavy ones, about loneliness, about choice, about how the land shaped people, and how people sometimes had to fight back. With him, Clara did not feel like she had to earn kindness. It was simply there. Matthew Pierce did not disappear. One afternoon, he showed up again in Red Hollow, drunk and bitter. He stood outside Clara's shop, shouting cruel words, trying to drag her name through the street. People watched from doorways. No one stepped in. Old fear stirred in Clara's stomach, but it did not stop her feet. She walked out and faced him in the open. Her voice did not shake. She told him to leave. She told him his power over her had ended the moment he turned away from her in that saloon. Matthew laughed and called her the same old names. Too tall, wrong, unnatural. Before he could say more, Colt stepped between them. He did not raise his voice. He simply told Matthew that if he ever came near Clara again, there would be consequences he would not enjoy. Something in Colt's calm made the street feel suddenly smaller. Matthew looked around and saw no support. He cursed and stumbled away, defeated at last. That night, Clara cried for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow. Not from shame or fear, but from release. Colt sat beside her and said nothing. He did not try to fix her tears. He let them fall. When they stopped, Clara realized something important. She was no longer surviving. She was living. Spring came slow but sure. The land softened. The air warmed. Clara's shop stayed busy. The ranch thrived. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky wide in gold, Colt asked Clara to walk with him. They stopped on a rise overlooking open land. The wind moved gentle through the grass, Colt told her he loved her, not because she was strong, not because she endured, but because she was herself. Clara looked out at the land she had crossed so far to reach. She thought of the girl on the train, staring through frozen glass, wondering if she would ever belong. She said yes. They married under open sky with no grand church and no false fronts, just friends, laughter, and the wide land bearing witness. Clara stood beside Colt Ramsey, taller than many, equal to all. Her head was high, her heart was full. When someone later asked her where she slept that first night she arrived in Red Hollow, Clara smiled. She knew the answer had changed her life forever. She slept exactly where she was meant to be,